I told you all, I'm the best. Who's next? You want to go, old man?
You want some of this, old man?
What happens when a trash-talking champion, high on his own invincibility, calls out a quiet legend in the front row? He expected a viral moment. What he got was a life-altering lesson in what real power is. At Las Vegas's Euphone Arena, a cocky UFC champion was poised to seal his supremacy with a mic drop. A night of predictable fanfare went nuclear when an ex-martial arts legend leapt out of the front row and into the cage. Dante the Rain Cruz was not your average title holder. For 10 years, he was a global MMA phenom, known for a perfect record, a ruthless fight style, and social media bravado that packed arenas. When he challenged Chuck Norris to a one-round exhibition, he had no idea he was awakening a disciplined warrior who'd been forged before MMA had a name. Norris didn't just accept. He took down Cruz's confidence with nothing more than precision, timing, and silence, setting off a process that would resonate far beyond the cage. What started as a viral PR stunt would turn into a humbling rite of passage. The crowd gathered for a beatdown and were treated to a baptism. And Las Vegas would never be the same on the night a legend taught a champion what real power is. Before we get back to it, let us know where you're listening from. And if this episode gets to you, you should be subscribed because tomorrow I've reserved something special for you. The T-Mobile Arena throbbed with sheer energy. All seats were filled, every voice blending into a cacophony of deafening sound that reverberated off the walls. Floodlights shone bright onto the highly polished octagon at center stage. Cameras burst like lightning as fans yelled from all sides. Some waved signs. Others sat forward on the edge of their seats, gazes fixed on the tunnel entrance. The air of the evening felt alive, nearly electric, filled with the potential for something huge. In the locker room, Dante, the Rain Cruz, shadow-boxed in front. Of the mirror, his movements swift and sharp. Already, beads of perspiration glistened on his brow, despite the actual battle having yet to start. A product of perfect MMA man. Lightning quick reflexes, seemingly impossible power for his compact frame, and a fighter's intelligence that had led him to an unblemished 18-0 record. But it was the arrogance that ticked the box. The manner in which he glared into opponents' eyes, the trash-talking, the viral post-fight celebrations. 5 minutes, champ, a production assistant said, sticking his head in the door. Coach Roy Beckett, a grizzled man with gray stubble and hard hands, was in the corner. He'd been coaching fighters since before Dante was born, and he'd seen his share of champs rise and fall. Most of them brought down by the same thing that had made them so great, their own invincibility. "Remember the game plan," Roy said, his voice gravel-hued from shouting decades in corners. "He's tough but slow. Don't get complacent. Finish clean." Dante grinned, already imagining the highlight. "Real KO. Won't even need the second round, coach." Roy nodded, but something in his eyes hinted at concern. Not about this evening's fight. Dante would win, no question, but about what came afterward. The way fame was transforming his fighter every day. Meanwhile, over in the other side of the arena, a black SUV arrived at the VIP entrance. Security guards stiffened instantly as the back door opened. Chuck Norris emerged, dressed simply in dark jeans and a button-down shirt. No entourage, no fanfare, just quiet confidence gained over decades. "Mr. Norris, you're welcome to the event," said the security chief, offering his hand. "We've got you ringside, as you asked." Chuck nodded, shaking the man's hand firmly. At 85, he moved with the same measured control that had governed his entire life. The years had etched lines on his face and grayed his hair, but they'd not reduced his presence. If anything, age had refined it to something even more compelling, a calm assurance that commanded respect without asking for it. Inside the arena, the lights went down. The crowd erupted as Big Vinny Stone, events announcer, strode to center stage. His voice boomed out through the speakers, showmanship incarnate. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to UFC Mega Card," he bellowed, arms wide open. "Are you ready for the most explosive night in MMA history?" The crowd response was deafening. Signs waved, phones held up to catch every instant. Among the celebrities facing the front row, cameras found faces from Hollywood, the music scene, sports heroes. But none of them created the quiet ripple of awe that spread when Chuck Norris slid quietly into his seat. A few nearby fans exchanged glances, nodding discreetly. "Did you see who just sat down? Is he really him?" Mia Delgado, lead interviewer for the UFC and former fighter herself, clocked Chuck's arrival via her earpiece. She smiled, remembering, watching his tournaments as a kid. Real martial arts before the sport became as much about personality as prowess. "We've got a special guest tonight," she said into her microphone, her voice carrying to viewers around the world. The legend himself, Chuck Norris, taking in the action from ringside. The camera had panned briefly to Chuck, who had graced it with a humble nod. No peacocking, no need to own the moment. His legacy spoke for itself. The prelim fights flew by in a blur of action, the crowd growing increasingly electric with each bout, then lights down again. Smoke machines filled the tunnel with atmospheric fog. Opening chords of Dante's entrance music struck, a driving bass line that shook the foundations of the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen," Big Vinny's voice reached a crescendo. "It's time for our main event." Introducing first the challenger, a veteran with 27 professional fights, Marcus the Mountain, Rivera. Rivera came out to respectful applause, a fighter famous for his grit and technique. He'd fought his way into his title shot the hard way, grinding through the ranks year upon year. And now Vinny paused for drama, defending his title for the 5th time with a perfect professional record of 18 wins, 0 losses. The man who reigns supreme in the octagon, Dante, the rain cruise. The arena erupted. Dante emerged from the smoke, arms raised, spinning slowly to take in the adoration from every side. His walkout was choreographed to perfection, part fighter, part rock star. He bounced down the aisle, slapping hands with fans, pausing to flex for cameras, every movement calculated to feed the Dante brand. From his seat, Chuck watched silently, seeing past the spectacle to the fighter underneath. Talent was there, undeniably, but something else too, something that often led to a fall. Inside the cage, final instructions were given. The fighters touched gloves. Rivera respectfully, Dante with a smirk and a wink for the camera. The referee stepped back. The bell rang. Dante exploded forward immediately. No feeling-out process, no respect for Rivera's experience. He pressed forward with a series of strikes, jabs, crosses, a high kick that just missed. Rivera backpedaled, trying to create distance, but Dante cut off the cage expertly. "Cruz showing why he's the champion," Mia commented from her position. "The speed advantage is obvious from the opening seconds." Midway through the first round, Dante started talking. "That all you got, old man?" He taunted loud enough for the front rows to hear. Rhea fired back with a sharp counter, almost catching him, but Dante slipped it effortlessly, his smirk growing bigger. He yelled, playing to the audience. Rhea tried changing to close space to block to create an opening, but Dante would not give him the opportunity. He faded left, snapped a kick to the ribcage, then came in close, hooks to the torso, jab to the nose. He pushed Rivera into the cage, leaning in close to whisper another insult. "You don't belong in here with me." Rivera pushed him away and circled to the side, but Dante pursued him, self-assured, stalking. The end was abrupt. A flash of speed combination. Left hook to the torso, right uppercut as Rivera relaxed his guard, then a crushing head kick that landed with a sickening thud. Rivera folded. The referee jumped between them, waving off the bout. The crowd went mad. "It's over!" Big Vinny yelled into his mic. 1 minute 47 seconds of the first round, Dante. The Rain Cruise is still unbeaten. Medics dashed into the cage as Dante strutted around the edge of it, arms in the air, basking in the adulation. He jumped onto the fence, pumping, fists yelling to his people. Some of them went wild, excited by his control. Others grumbled, uneasy with his showboating when Rhea was still being tended to. Chuck sat in his corner, face unmoved. He'd seen this narrative before. Skilled fighters confusing dramatic control with control. His gaze followed Dante, not with criticism, but with the measured evaluation of a man who'd forgotten more fighting than most would ever know. Rivera was led to his feet, stunned but awake. He attempted to make his way to Dante for the traditional post-fight respect, but Dante was too engaged to play act to the crowd. The act of sportsmanship went unnoted or ignored. Big Vinny stepped into the cage to render the official decision. Pedante grabbed the microphone before the announcer could utter a word. Did anybody expect anything different? That's how you end a fight. That's what true champions do. Coach Roy slightly shook his head in the corner, but Dante was past listening to any advice now. The excitement of the crowd fueled him, propelled him onward. 18-0, he went on, pacing the cage like an animal trapped behind steel bars. Who's next? Who's got the guts to come in here with me? His gaze swept the arena, the front row, and there he was. Chuck Norris, sitting quietly, eyeing the perfect target, the ultimate clout grab. Dante's smile grew. He pointed straight at Chuck, still gasping for air from the fight. Wait, is that Chuck Norris? I see the legend himself. His voice was heavy with staged respect that turned immediately to sarcasm. Man, I used to watch your films as a kid. All those roundhouse and spin kick memes. A quiet fell over parts of the crowd. Cameras turned on Chuck, who stood stock still, staring at Dante. You know, Dante went on, riding the newfound tension. Folks always ask themselves how the old greats would hold up in the modern game. What do you know, Chuck? Care to step in here? Demonstrate these people whether those cinema moves translate in a real fight. Gasps spread throughout the crowd. Mia Delgado's eyes grew wide with the brazenness. Cruz is challenging Chuck Norris, she told her headset, incredulity filling her voice. This has never been seen before. Chuck did not move quickly. He remained seated, staring intently at Dante. No smile, no scowl, just wary calm. Dante bounced on his toes, spurred by the silence. What's the problem? Age finally catch up with the legend. Come on, Chuck. One-round show. Let's put the debate to rest. Old school versus new school. Then slowly, methodically, Chuck Norris stood. The arena went silent. Phones were raised higher. All cameras trained on the martial arts icon as he stepped up to his full height. Dante's smirking stopped for a single moment before it came back broader than ever. Oh, he's rising, Dante yelled, his voice growing more excited. Ladies and gentlemen, are we on the cusp of witnessing something historic? Chuck did not say anything. He merely stared at Dante from across the space between them, the power of his being filling the arena more fully than any bellowed challenge ever had. And in that instant, as luck of Chuck started to emerge from the sea of faces, Coach Roy Beckett shut his eyes for an instant. He knew something his fighter didn't, that some tests once posed alter everything, that some legends stay legends for reasons greater than the limelight, that some things have to be learned the hard way. The chants swelled louder, crashing through the stadium like thunder. Chuck. Smartphones held aloft in all directions, capturing what was already becoming the most surprising moment in UFC history. Dante the Rain. Cruz remained in the middle of the octagon, microphone still clutched in hand, his arrogant grin now appearing, set a little more firmly, as Chuck Norris stood upright, speechless and impassive. Big Vinny Stone hurried over to take charge of events. He reached for the microphone, but Dante turned away, still focused on Chuck. "Come on, legend," Dante called out, voice carrying over the crowd's roar. "One round, just me and you. Unless those moves only work with camera tricks." Chuck remained silent, but his eyes, sharp, focused, penetrating, never left Dante's. Then with deliberate calm, he reached up and unbuttoned his cuffs, rolling up his sleeves with methodical precision. The gesture was modest, but the message clear. The crowd's roar doubled in an instant. Mia Delgado spoke into her broadcast microphone, her voice strained with professional control that barely held back her own excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen, I can hardly believe what we are witnessing. Chuck Norris seems to be going through with Dante Cruz's challenge. For those who may only be familiar with Chuck from internet memes or his movie career, let me tell you, this is a man who won the professional middleweight karate championship title for 6 years running. His genuine martial arts credentials are not in doubt." In Dante's corner, Coach Roy Beckett shot rapidly to the cage, grabbing the fence. "Dante, come here right now," he snapped, his creased face pinched with worry. Dante ran over, still riding, the high of the adrenaline rush of winning in the throng of excitement. "Believe this, Coach Chuck Norris. This is going global, going viral." Roy caught him by the shoulder, yanking him in. "Listen, this isn't a movie. That guy in the first row isn't an actor. He's the real deal. I trained with guys who competed. In tournaments with him back then, he's 85 years old." "Coach," Dante broke in, rolling his eyes, "it's just for show. Good publicity. I'll go light. Make it look good." "You're not hearing me." Roy's voice turned harder, urgent. "Age doesn't remove what's bone deep. You pay attention to his eyes, not his hands, not his feet. His eyes, they would inform you what's to come." Before Dante could say anything, UFC officials were gathering by Chuck's seat. The president of the company had arrived, motioning frantically, obviously worried about the impromptu challenge. Issues of insurance, liability concerns, regulatory issues. But the crowd wouldn't let it happen. The chanting was ear-shattering. Social media was already erupting. The moment trumped regulations. After a hasty meeting, the president reluctantly nodded and walked to the cage, where he leaned over to whisper to Big Vinny, who grinned a gigantic smile. Vinny stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like we have a very special exhibition bout in the making." The crowd went wild. Dante held up his arms in victory, milking the moment. "UFC management has sanctioned one-round showdown between our champion and the legendary Chuck Norris. Not a bout. Just 2 martial artists who are going to give us a moment we will never forget." Medical personnel approached Chuck trying to do a cursory examination, but he waved them away with courteous firmness. He took off his watch, passing it over to a security guard, then his phone. Every move was cost-effective, slow. Never before. Mia went on with her explanations, attempting to put things into perspective for the audience. Chuck Norris is not only a Hollywood legend. He changed martial arts in America before he became an actor. He established his own discipline, Chunkuko, a combination of all the different schools, his black belts in Tangu, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and Judo. Chuck walked up to the steps of the cage at the same controlled pace he had been keeping all night. No dashing, no slouching, just intent in each step. The security personnel stepped aside automatically. One of them pushed open the door of the cage with a deferential nod. Within the octagon, Dante paced back and forth, flexing his arms, attempting to keep his muscles loose after his last bout. Even with all his bluster, a flicker of doubt traversed his features as he observed Chuck mount the stairs. There was something disconcerting about the older man's calmness. Something not quite in keeping with the story Dante had woven in his own mind. Chuck stepped into the cage without ceremony. He stood there a moment, getting the canvas beneath, his feet easing himself into the confines. His countenance was not stern, not taut, merely intent. He cocked his head to one side, shrugged his shoulders once. Big Vinny was hardly able to hold back. This was the sort of moment that announcers prayed for. Unadulterated, spontaneous drama. "In this corner!" he yelled, gesturing towards Dante. Our current defending unbeaten UFC champion, Dante the Rain Cruz. The crowd reacted with muffled cheers and boos, more boos than Dante was used to hearing. And in this corner, Vinny went on, his tone changing to one that was virtually reverence-filled. Martial arts legend, six-time world karate champion, actor, cultural icon. Chuck Norris. The reaction was deafening. Individuals who had been standing all evening were on their feet. Camera flashes created a strobe-like effect about the cage. Chuck nodded curtly in response to the welcome. No more. His attention stayed inward-focused. A referee stepped into the cage, the same who had, minutes ago, controlled Dante's title defense. He seemed unsure about this improvised scenario, but was professional enough to accommodate. He signaled to both men to go into the center. "All right, gentlemen, we're going to do one 5-minute round. Exhibition rules. I want a clean fight. Protect yourselves at all times. Touch gloves if you want." A cocky Dante reached his gloved fist out. "Hope you're prepared for this, old-timer." Chuck touched gloves fleetingly, respectfully, but held his tongue. His silence was making Dante annoyed, wearing down the champion's cocky veneer. Returning to their corners, Mia's tone deepened in her commentary. "What we're about to see is no novelty showcase. This is a conflict of generations, contemporary MMA spectacle versus old-school martial arts philosophy. Cruz is the new school, flashy, outspoken, social media conscious. Norris is the old guard, discipline, humility, allowing your abilities to speak for you. To tell and to prepare this story has taken a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It would mean so much to us. Now back to the story." The referee's hand went up. The crowd collectively held its breath. "Fight!" Dante burst forward at once, much as he had against Rivera. No respect, no restraint, sheer fury designed to overload and intimidate. He threw a sizzling combination jab, cross, left hook with professional grade, precision and quickness. None of them connected. Chuck slipped the jab, parried the cross, and just wasn't there for the hook. His movement was minimal, effective, not a wasted motion, no flashy dodges, just disappeared like smoke in fingers. Dante blinked briefly, disoriented, then pushed forward once more. Flying knee, rear elbow, spinning back kick, each strike more. Flamboyant than the previous, crafted not only to hurt, but to provide a highlight. Chuck neutralized each one, not with equal athleticism, but with positioning, timing, and an almost preternatural sense of knowing Dante's thoughts. Where Dante was explosive, Chuck was economical. Where Dante punched with 6 movements, Chuck parried with 1. Frustration flared on Dante's face. He wasn't landing anything clean. Worse, he was starting to feel like he was under scrutiny, dissected. Chuck had thrown a single strike yet. He was just observing, improvising, learning from each interaction. Amazing defensive movement by Norris. Mia watched, by the book tone cracking into sincere wonder. Cruz is attacking. Everything he's got, but Norris is frustrating him by inches each time. This is master-level distance control. Dante stepped back, reevaluating. The smug grin was gone now, replaced with intense resolve. He went left, feinted a jab, and shot. In for a takedown, switching levels with the velocity that had annihilated so many earlier foes. Chuck sprawled perfectly, hips heavy, posture balanced. Not only did he shut down the takedown, but he used Dante's momentum to take him past, leaving the champion off balance and in danger. It was the ideal time for a counterattack, but Chuck merely reset his stance, calm, waiting. The crowd was growing increasingly vocal with each exchange, but the tone had shifted. These were not the mindless roars that followed Dante's standard dominance. There was awe in the sound now, admiration, respect. "Fight back," Dante bellowed abruptly, impatience overriding. "Come on, throw something." For the first time, the smallest, Glimmer of a smile grazed the corner of Chuck's mouth. He nodded his head slightly, respect, not ridicule, and sank deeper into his position. Dante attacked again, unleashing a scorching five-punch flurry that would have destroyed most men. Chuck parried the first two, deflected the third, blocked the fourth, and then, for the first time, he struck back. It wasn't dramatic. No spin. Kick. No jumping punch. Only a plain, straight right hand that landed on Dante's solar plexus as he stretched out for his last hook. The blow halted Dante in mid-movement. Air exploded from his chest. His eyes went wide with shock, not from agony, although there was plenty, but with the accuracy, the immaculate placement. The manner Chuck had discovered the precise instant when he was most vulnerable. Norris's first strike, and its textbook perfection, Mia burst out. This is the difference between fighting for cameras and fighting from years of actual experience. Efficiency in movement, timing perfect. Dante regained his balance, but something essential had shifted in the cage. The script he'd written for himself, new school overpowering old school, young lion taking on old legend, was coming apart second by second. In his corner, Coach Roy observed with a mix of dismay and bleak satisfaction. He'd attempted to caution Dante. Some things couldn't be learned secondhand. "Dante," he shouted, "slow down. Get your rhythm." But Dante was past listening now. His breathing had accelerated. Sweat streamed down his face. For the first time in his professional life, he sensed something foreign invading his mind. Doubt. Chuck stood quiet in the middle of the octagon, arms up in his signature guard stance. Nothing fancy, nothing threatening, just at-basis solid, refined over decades of training and actual combat experience. "Don't let him into your head," Roy bellowed from the corner. "Stick with what you know." Dante nodded hard, attempting to reboot in his head. He came at him more carefully now, keeping the distance, feeling with jabs instead of investing in power shots. Chuck observed, stone patient, feet planted to canvas, but prepared to slide either way. His eyes, unblinking, intent, clear, followed every whiffle, every movement of weight, every telegraphed intention. The arena became unnaturally still. The crowd's bloodlust replaced by a shared expectation. They weren't looking, just another brawl. Now they were seeing something more unusual. A masterclass, an in-life demonstration of why some reputations survive beyond spectacle or publicity. 30 seconds in, and the dynamic is totally transformed, Mia described quietly. What was initially a publicity stunt has turned into a deep martial arts moment. Observe Cruz's body language. He's battling an entirely new fight now. It was true. Dante's signature brashness was gone. His movements less sure, his once unlimited, confidence visibly shaken. He threw another combination. Technically flawless, yet somehow empty, fighting by rote rather than with passion, Chuck deflected the last blow and for the second time retorted, a plain sidekick to the knee not thrown. To inflict harm, but to upset balance, to cause an opening. Dante slipped a fraction of an inch, lowering his guard for half a second. That was all the opportunity Chuck needed. He closed and threw a perfect textbook jab, snapping Dante's head back, reddening his nose. The audience gasped as one. "This is not just an old legend fighting his own weight," Mia whispered respectfully. "Chuck Norris is methodically disassembling a UFC champion." In the ring, something snapped in Dante's eyes, the final shreds of his conviction, the pillars of his identity as an invincible champion. He came forward with a bellow, discarding technique for brute force, unleashing wild hooks and haymakers. Chuck simply wasn't there. As if fighting a shadow, a memory, a legend that refused to fade with time. At cage side, Big Vinny Stone was agog, once without words. Even he who earned his income from exaggeration knew no words could do justice to what they were seeing. The crowd had already started chanting again, "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" And in the middle of the cage, as Dante Cruz wrestled with the unraveling of all he believed about himself, Chuck Norris still moved to the same measured, calm he'd had since the moment he stepped into the arena. Not fighting for cameras, not fighting for legacy, fighting for something older, deeper, and a whole lot longer. 2 minutes into the show, sweat streamed down Dante Cruz's face in rivulets. His breathing came in quick gasps. Blood from his nose had dried in a red streak across his cheek. Yet for all his work, he had nothing to show for it. No damage done, no gain made, not even the satisfaction of having made Chuck Norris break his methodical pace. Chuck stood 5 FT'd away, breathing controlled, and even no wasted motion, no unnecessary effort. His eyes were always on Dante, watchful but unhurried. If he was tired, it was invisible. The contrast was stark. Dante, the professional athlete in top physical condition, replete with signs of strain, while Chuck, at age 85, seemed as calm as when he'd first stepped into the cage. What we're witnessing is the difference between conditioning and efficiency, Mia Delgato told viewers, her voice low with reverence. Cruz is in phenomenal athletic form, but he's expending energy with every explosive movement. Norris is working on decades of honed technique, using just exactly what's needed, nothing more. The crowd had adopted an odd rhythm where UFC events normally filled the air with constant noise, cheers, jeers, chants. Now a strange stillness had fallen, punctuated only by gasps and murmurs when Chuck made a particularly deft defensive move. They weren't observing a fight anymore. They were watching a demonstration. Dante circled right, frustration in his clenched jaw. "Fight back," he shouted, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Stop running." Chuck's expression didn't change. No anger at the taunt, no visible reaction at all. He adjusted his position slightly, maintaining optimal distance. In the champion's corner, Coach Roy leaned against the fence, his weathered face a mask of concern and resignation. He'd seen the scenario play out before. Talented fighters undone not by a lack of skill, but by a lack of understanding, physical. Ability without philosophical foundation. "Breathe, Dante," he called out. "Find your center." But Dante was beyond coaching now. His game plan had disintegrated. His confidence, once his greatest weapon, lay in tatters. All that remained was raw emotion and wounded pride. A dangerous combination for any fighter. He lunged forward again, throwing a flashy, spinning back fist that had become one of his signature moves, a technique that had made highlight reels and social media compilations throughout his career. Chuck didn't just avoid it. He made it look predictable. As Dante's arm whirled through empty air, Chuck stepped in, not to counter with his own strike, but to subtly disrupt Dante's balance with a gentle shoulder check. The champion stumbled, nearly falling, and had to awkwardly regain his footing. The maneuver hadn't hurt him physically, but the psychological impact was devastating. His most dramatic technique hadn't just been defended, it had been dismissed. Mia leaned forward in her commentator's seat. "Did you see that?" Norris could have capitalized with a damaging counter, but he chose control over punishment. He's not trying to hurt Cruz. He's teaching him. The crowd sensed it too. The atmosphere in the arena had transformed from bloodthirsty anticipation to something approaching reverence. Phones remained raised, recording every second, but the viewers behind them watched with different eyes. "Now stop playing with me," Dante shouted, genuine anger replacing his earlier showmanship. "Throw something real." For the first time, Chuck spoke, his voice calm, clear, carrying easily despite the arena's size. "I am just 2 words, but they landed, with more impact than any physical strike." Dante blinked, momentarily frozen by the simple response. Chuck continued, his tone conversational as if they were discussing philosophy in a dojo rather than facing off in an octagon surrounded by thousands. Fighting isn't about who hits hardest or moves fastest. It's about who controls themselves. First, their opponent, second. The arena fell completely silent, straining to catch every word. Dante shook his head, trying to clear it. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was the champion, the main event, the star. Yet somehow, he'd become a supporting character in his own story. He attacked again, this time with greater technical discipline. A clean 1-2 combination followed by a leg kick. Textbook MMA executed with professional precision. Chuck slipped the punches by millimeters, then checked the kick, not with dramatic force, but with calm efficiency. As Dante's leg rebounded from the check, Chuck finally unleashed a genuine counterattack. It wasn't flashy, no spinning kick, no leaping punch, just 3 perfectly placed strikes in rapid succession, a straight jab to create distance, a cross to the body that folded Dante slightly forward, and a short uppercut that snapped his head back. Each strike landed with surgical precision, not thrown to knockout, but to demonstrate, to illuminate the gaps in Dante's defense, the flaws in his approach. The champion staggered backward, more surprised than hurt. He'd been hit harder in previous fights, taken more damage, faced more aggressive opponents, but he'd never felt so thoroughly red, so completely exposed. "Remarkable!" Mia exclaimed. Chuck Norris just delivered a classic karate combination, simple, direct, effective. That's traditional martial arts philosophy in action, no wasted motion, maximum effect. In the crowd, fans who had come expecting entertainment were receiving education instead. Many had never seen traditional martial arts executed at this level. Not the Hollywood version, not the tournament version, but the real application by a genuine master. Dante touched his face where the uppercut had landed, looking at the blood on his glove with something approaching wonder. The pain wasn't significant, but the precision was astonishing. Chuck had found a gap in his defense that neither he nor his coaches had identified through 18 professional fights. "Now he's got it," Coach Roy murmured too quietly for anyone to hear. He recognized the look in Dante's eyes, the first glimmer of genuine understanding breaking through the shell of ego. Dante approached again, but differently now, more measured, more thoughtful. He threw a probing jab, not committing, just testing. Chuck parried it gently, then nodded, a small gesture of approval. Better. Something shifted in Dante's expression, a flicker of recognition, of respect, reluctantly given. He tried another combination, still aggressive, but more controlled. Chuck defended, then countered with a single body shot, not to hurt, but to indicate where the opening had been. A teacher's correction rather than a fighter's attack. "What we're witnessing goes beyond fighting," Mia observed, her professional detachment giving way to genuine emotion. "This is the passing of knowledge across generations happening right before our eyes." The crowd began to sense it too. The jeers had completely stopped. The bloodlust had evaporated. They were no longer spectators at a fight. They were witnesses to something approaching a sacred ritual. At cage side, Big Vinny Stone stood uncharacteristically silent. Even he, with his wrestler's instinct for showmanship, recognized that. His usual bombastic commentary would be inappropriate, like shouting in a temple. 3 minutes into the round, the dynamic had completely transformed. Dante was no longer fighting to win or even to save face. He was fighting to understand. Each exchange a question, each defensive movement by Chuck an answer. "Keep your right hand." "Higher," Chuck said quietly after slipping another of Dante's combinations. "You drop it when you throw the left hook." Dante nodded reflexively, settling his guard. Only later did the strangeness of the moment sink in, taking technical counsel from an adversary in the midst of what was otherwise supposed to be a fight. Chuck went on, his tone steady, pedagogic. "Power is from the ground up, not from the arm. Plant yourself first." With every conversation, with every word of counsel, the show moved further away from fight and towards communion. Two fighters separated by decades, but bridged by discipline. In Dante's corner, Coach Roy sat and observed, with an expression that had softened from worry to something near pride. Not pride in how his fighter fought, but pride in seeing him evolve. witnessing the initial chinks in the armor of pride that had pushed Dante to championship heights and were now on the verge of destroying him. Cruz is changing before our eyes, Mia spoke softly. Notice the way he moves now. More efficient, more focused. He's learning decades of martial know-how in a matter of minutes. It was true. Dante's out-of-control brutality had given rise to something more controlled. He still struck with the athleticism and technical ability that had crowned him champion. But there was now thought behind every movement, intent beyond mere overwhelming. 4 minutes in, the exhibition was something that none of the thousands of people present had anticipated. Not a spectacle, not a fight, but a living demonstration of martial arts at its deepest. Chuck continued to command the space to set terms for every encounter. But there was no domination in his style, only teaching, only directing. When he attacked, it was to enlighten, not to harm. When he defended, it was to show, not to shame. What Dante Cruz demanded was a fight, Mia said, her throat thick with feeling. What Chuck Norris provided was a lesson. The crowd observed in awed silence now, phones still rolling, but somehow less obtrusive. Many of the onlookers who had crossed into the arena seeking blood sport found themselves observing something more profound. A direct transmission of knowledge that stretched back over centuries of martial tradition. With 30 seconds left in the round, Chuck finally broke. His silence once more, his voice loud enough for many of those in the front rows to hear. True strength is not born of the ability to dominate others. It is born of the ability to master yourself. Dante stopped, chest panting, sweat and blood intermingled on his face. For the first time all night, his face held no hint of arrogance or defiance. Something was penetrating. A realization beyond the moment, the arena, the spectacle he had constructed. Then why fight at all? He asked, real curiosity taking the place of his earlier hostility. Chuck nodded, acknowledging the earnestness of the query. To remind ourselves what we're capable of and what we're not. The final seconds of the round ran down. Neither man sent in another attack. Instead, they circled one another in a bizarre harmony. Distance maintained, respect accumulating with every passing instant. When the buzzer blasted, signaling the end of the 5-minute exhibition, the arena exploded, not in the usual post-brawl frenzy, but in a standing ovation. Phones remained aloft, capturing what everyone there realized was a moment in history, not because of its spectacle, but because of its substance. Big Vinny made his way to the cage, microphone in hand, but, for once, seemed unsure of how to articulate what they had all witnessed. The usual superlatives rang hollow, almost sacrilegious. In the midst of the octagon, Chuck offered his hand to Dante. Not a perfunctor touch of gloves, but an earnest gesture. Fighter to fighter, martial artist to martial artist. Dante hesitated, for a moment before accepting it. His grip firm, his eyes finally looking into Chuck's without challenge or bravado. Something essential had changed in the young champion's bearing. A seed implanted that would continue to grow long after the lights went out, and the crowd was gone. As they stood the handshake, Chuck addressed one last time, his voice low, but carrying to those around him. The actual battle isn't in here. He pointed to the cage that enveloped them. It's in here. He held his chest for a moment, and with that phrase, the third part of the evening came to an end. Not with a knockout finish or a decisive win, but with a moment of understanding that could span generations, styles, and schools. In the commentator's booth, Mia Delgado brushed a tear that had welled up despite her professional demeanor. "I've done hundreds of fights," she whispered into her mic, "but I've never covered one that counted." The hum in the arena had not lessened as Chuck and Dante went back to their opposite corners. If anything, the tension had grown more intense, changed from the typical bloodlust expectation to something more respectful, more attuned to the gravity of the moment. Coach Roy ducked between the cage wires, towel clutched in his hand, and moved toward Dante with guarded eyes. He had figured he would find his fighter upset, humiliated, combative, all the typical responses of a dominant champion facing unprecedented test. Instead, he discovered Dante calm, contemplative, his eyes trained on Chuck in the octagon. "You okay?" Roy asked, wiping at the blood on Dante's face. Dante nodded slowly. "Yeah, I'm good." His voice was devoid of its normal swagger. "He's not what I thought he'd be." Roy's weathered face softened. Legends never are. Back at Chuck's corner, no entourage stood in wait. No coaches, no cut man, no trainers shouting encouragement. Chuck stood alone as he had come in, self-contained, self-sufficient. He drank a sip of water, then put the bottle down with care. Big Vinny made his way to Chuck's side of the cage, microphone in his hand, ready to cash in on the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we're seeing tonight is totally unprecedented. The great Chuck Norris has just..." Chuck held up a hand quietly, halting Vinny in mid-sentence. "Not yet," he whispered. "We're not done." The arena went still once more, the tension mounting. What else was there? The show round was timed for 5 minutes. It was over. The greeting was given. Symbolically, ethically, the meeting was over. But something in Chuck's posture indicated otherwise. He faced back toward the center of the cage, eyes locking onto Dante's again across the way. "1 round more," Chuck stated, voice firm despite its controlled tone. "If you're willing," the room exploded, phones held higher, social media timelines, clogging with real-time messages. Chuck v. Dante was trending globally even then, footage of the first round going viral across networks. At Dante's corner, Coach Roy's face came alight with alarm. "Dante," he exclaimed with urgency, "you don't have to do this. You've been respectful. It's sufficient." But Dante was already stripping the towel from his shoulders and returning it to Roy. Something had changed in him, not simply tactically, but fundamentally. The brash showman who had stepped into the cage earlier that evening seemed to have receded, and something more genuine was left behind. "I must," he said matter-of-factly. Roy scanned his fighter's face, nodded reluctantly. "Remember what you've already learned. Don't return to who you were 5 minutes ago." Dante moved forward, back to the center of the octagon, where Chuck already stood waiting. The referee, still trying to absorb this unexpected extension, scrambled to catch up. "Are both fighters prepared to continue?" he asked, protocol reasserting itself even in the midst of an unprecedented situation. Chuck nodded once. Dante did the same. "Good." Second round bout, but neither man burst into action as they might have in response to the crowd's expectation. They danced around each other with a new sense of knowing, like partners who had mastered one another's cadence, men who had risen above competition. Mia Delgado leaned forward in her announcer's chair, voice barely above a whisper. "What we're witnessing is extraordinary. Cruz isn't attacking indiscriminately anymore. Or he's measuring, evaluating, applying actual strategy against Norris's experience." It was true. Dante's style had altered radically. The flashy spins and jumps that had marked his title campaign were replaced by measured purpose, each step deliberate, each feint significant. He threw a probing jab, not to hurt but to feel out. Chuck deflected it with characteristic aplomb, but nodded slightly. Acknowledgement of the better approach. "Cruz is fighting like a different individual altogether." Mia went on. "It's like the first round took away the showman and all that was left was the martial artist." From his corner, Coach Roy beamed in increasing pride. This was the fighter he had envisioned Dante becoming all along. Technically astute, athletically talented, but now incorporating the one thing that had been in short supply: humility. Preceding the art itself, the interactions became more technical, more sophisticated. Dante would hit with a combination. Chuck would block, then counter just enough to show the exposed weakness. It felt less like a fight and more like a conversation, techniques and reactions, a physical discussion of martial philosophy. 2 minutes into the second round, something amazing occurred. Dante threw a flawless combination. Jab, cross, hook that. Suddenly pierced Chuck's defense. The hook brushed against Chuck's temple, not solid enough to hurt, but clean contact nonetheless. The crowd gasped. Chuck himself seemed briefly stunned. Then a genuine grin spread across his face. He nodded in appreciation. "Good," he said. "Very good." Dante didn't gloat at the small triumph. No raised arms, no playing to the cameras. Instead, he merely returned to position, respecting the moment with silent intensity more than enthusiasm. In the commentator's booth, Mia found herself having trouble keeping emotion in check. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we're seeing here goes beyond sport. It is master and student discovering one another through the ages. The best of martial arts. Tradition unfolded on our sport's grandest stage. The audience seemed to get it too. The customary chants and jeers had been replaced by awed murmurs, simultaneous gasps of astonishment at unusually adept exchanges, spontaneous clapping for flashes of technical wizardry from either man. 3 minutes in, Chuck started to step up. The pace, not with belligerence, but with sophistication. His counters were more elaborate, his defensive maneuvers more difficult to decipher. He wasn't attempting to inundate Dante. He was drawing him further into the dialogue. Dante retaliated in kind. His blows became more intelligent, more inventive, not mad haymakers or pre-programmed combinations, but actual real-time problem-solving. When one didn't work, he changed immediately, learning with every rep. "This is amazing," Mia said, shaking her head in amazement. "Cruz is transforming before our very eyes. This is not adjustment to an opponent. It's rewriting of a fighter's entire game plan. 4 minutes into the second round, something changed once more. Chuck pulled back ever so slightly, lowered his hands just a fraction, not in recklessness, but in invitation. "Show me what you've learned," he said, voice ringing clear in the hushed arena. Dante hesitated, recognizing the weight of the moment. Then with new clarity, he launched himself, not with his trademark moves or fan-pleasing techniques, but with something that seemed almost choreographed in its symmetry. A 3-strike combination, followed by a sweeping low kick, executed with perfect balance and control. Chuck parried the first 2 strikes, slipped the third, checked the kick. But the entire combination was unlike anything Dante had produced before. It wasn't taken from Chuck's style or borrowed from classic martial arts. It was new. Dante's. Innate athleticism and technical MMA proficiency, but conditioned by the wisdom Chuck had shown. Fusion, evolution, progression. Chuck's eyes sparkled with genuine approval. Now you're discovering your own path. In that moment, something rare and sublime crystallized in the octagon. An understanding that crossed beyond competition, that spanned centuries of martial tradition. The young champion wasn't merely fighting, an aging legend. He was being initiated into a tradition that honored substance over spectacle, mastery over dominance. The last 30 seconds of the round played out like a demonstration rather than a fight. Each man sharing techniques, responses, counters, not to vanquish the other, but to advance the aggregate knowledge of what fighting could be at its best. When the buzzer sounded, concluding the spontaneous second round, neither Chuck nor Dante appeared fatigued. Physically, they had strained themselves, but spiritually, energetically, they seemed recharged, as if they had tapped into something that fed rather than drained. The crowd to its feet, applause booming through the arena, not the usual bloodlust. Roar that followed a knockout, but something deeper. Appreciation, respect, acknowledgement of having seen something real and deep. As they clasped in the center one final time, Chuck laid both hands on Dante's shoulders, a gesture more meaningful than any trophy presentation or belt ceremony. "Remember this feeling?" Chuck said, his voice low but intense. Not the crowd, not the cameras. This clarity. This is what it takes to be a martial artist. Not merely a fighter. Dante nodded, eyes clear with comprehension. "Thank you," he said briefly. Big Vinny stepped forward hesitantly. Feeling the moment called for restraint even from him, he held out the microphone to Chuck first, but the legend shook his head, motioning instead to Dante. Vinny held out the microphone to the champion, who grasped it with unusual hesitation. The arena was silent, thousands leaning forward in anticipation of hearing what the loud-mouthed, cocky fighter had to say after such a life-altering experience. Dante stared at the microphone in his hand, then out at the waiting crowd, then finally at Chuck, who regarded him with tranquil, patient eyes. "I came in here tonight thinking I knew what fighting was about." Dante started, his voice in its normal performative mode. "I thought it was about being the loudest, the most dominant, the one people would talk about tomorrow." He paused, collecting himself, no longer performing for the cameras but talking from someplace real. "What I learned tonight is that real. Strength doesn't need to make itself known. It doesn't need highlight reels or trash talk." He glared at Chuck. "I called out a legend thinking I'd pad my record with another name. Instead, I met a teacher." The reaction of the crowd was instantaneous. Cheers spilling out across the arena, punctuated by whoops of approval and respect. Dante returned the microphone to Vinny, who looked hopefully over at Chuck. This time, the legend accepted it, but his words were typical few, measured, powerful. "Fighting reveals character," Chuck said, his voice firm. "Tonight, I watched a champion become a martial artist." He nodded toward Dante. "That transformation is worth more than any belt." With those words, he handed the microphone back and turned toward the cage door, ready to exit as quietly as he had entered, letting his actions speak louder than any victory speech could. As Chuck moved toward the exit, cameras following his every step, Mia delivered her final commentary on the unprecedented encounter. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we witnessed tonight wasn't just an exhibition. It was a passing of wisdom, a bridge between eras, a reminder that beneath the spectacle of modern MMA lies the timeless essence of martial arts. Dante Cruz came in as the champion. He leaves as something more important, a student of the deeper way." And as the arena lights gleamed off the sweat on both men's brows, as social media exploded with clips and quotes and hashtags, as the crowd continued its standing ovation, truth became evident to all who had witnessed the encounter. Some victories aren't measured in knockouts or submissions, but in moments of transformation that continue long after the cage door closes. The backstage area of Euphone Arena hummed with unusual energy. UFC events always generated buzz, adrenaline, excitement, the aftermath of combat. But tonight carried something different. Staff members spoke in hushed tones. Camera operators reviewed footage with expressions of wonder rather than professional detachment. Social media managers huddled around screens, watching engagement metrics skyrocket beyond anything they'd seen before. In the medical examination room, Dante, the Rain Cruz, sat quietly on the edge of a table as a doctor checked his vitals. Physically, he had suffered minimal damage, a bloody nose, a few bruises, nothing that wouldn't heal within days. Yet his stillness, his introspection, suggested deeper impact. "Blood pressure is a bit elevated, but that's normal after a fight," the doctor said, removing the cuff. "Any dizziness? Disorientation?" Dante shook his head. "I'm fine." The doctor made a note on his tablet. "Well, medically speaking, you're cleared. No concussion symptoms, no significant injuries." He hesitated, then added with unusual candor, "That was quite something out there." Dante nodded, saying nothing. Words seemed inadequate for what he had experienced in the octagon. Not just a fight, not even a lesson, but a fundamental shift in his understanding of his own path. Coach Roy entered, closing the door quietly behind him. The usual post-fight energy, tactical breakdowns, immediate analysis, planning for the next. Opponent was notably absent. Instead, he simply took a seat beside Dante, both men sitting in companionable silence for several moments. "How you feeling, champ?" Roy finally asked. Dante looked down at his hands, still wrapped in tape and leather. "Different," he said simply. Roy nodded, understanding immediately. That's growth. Meanwhile, in a separate section of the backstage area, UFC officials had hastily assembled a small press conference setup. Normally, the champion would be the focal point after a successful title defense. Tonight, however, all attention centered on Chuck Norris, who had reluctantly agreed to a brief media availability before departing. Mia Delgado stood off to the side, microphone in hand, preparing to conduct the interview for the live broadcast that was still ongoing. Her usual professional detachment had given way to barely contained emotion, the weight of the night's events affecting even her veteran journalist's composure. When Chuck entered, the assembled media fell silent. No shouted questions, no jostling. For position, just collective respect for a legend who had reminded everyone present of what martial arts could be at its purest. He took a seat at the table, posture relaxed, but proper face composed. No entourage accompanied him, no managers or PR representatives, just Chuck, as self-contained and centered after the exhibition as he had been before it. Mia approached, taking the seat across from him. "Chuck, thank you for joining us. I think I speak for everyone when I say that what we witnessed tonight transcended typical UFC competition. Can you share what was going through your mind when Dante Cruz issued that challenge?" Chuck considered the question carefully before answering, his voice steady and measured. "I saw a talented young man who had confused being a fighter with being a martial artist. The challenge itself wasn't important. It was the opportunity to demonstrate the difference. You didn't seem angered by his disrespect," Mia observed. "Many would have taken offense." "True confidence doesn't need to defend itself," Chuck replied simply. "When you've walked the path long enough, you recognize that arrogance usually masks insecurity. What Dante needed wasn't humiliation, but understanding." As Chuck spoke, his words were being broadcast throughout the arena on the big screens where thousands of fans remained in their seats, unwilling to leave despite the official end of the event. They watched in reverent silence, absorbing wisdom, rarely heard in a venue more accustomed to trash talk and bravado. Back in the medical room, Dante and Coach Roy watched the same broadcast on a small monitor. Dante leaned forward, hanging on every word, not as a critic or opponent now, but as a student. "Did you know who he really was?" Dante asked quietly. "Before tonight, I mean, not just the movies, the memes, but this." Roy nodded slowly. "Some of us did. Back when I was coming up, before MMA was mainstream, we all studied the traditional martial artists. Chuck wasn't just a movie star. He was 6-time world champion, undefeated, the real thing. Why didn't you tell me?" A hint of the old Dante, defensive, challenging, surfaced briefly. Roy met his gaze directly. "Would you have listened, or would you have dismissed it as old man talk about the good old days?" Dante fell silent, the truth of the observation landing cleanly. On screen, Mia was asking Chuck another question. There was a moment in the first round where you could have ended the exhibition decisively. Many watching felt you held back deliberately. Was that the case? Chuck's expression remained neutral, but his eyes reflected deeper consideration. The purpose wasn't to defeat him. It was to reach him. Fighting isn't primarily about domination. It's about communication. Dante speaks the language of combat fluently. I needed to use that language to convey something beyond technique in the arena. Those words resonated through the massive space. Fighters seated among the audience, champions, contenders, veterans of countless battles, nodded in recognition of a truth many had sensed, but few had articulated so clearly. And in the second round, Mia continued, there was a noticeable shift in how Dante approached the exhibition. What did you see in him during those moments? For the first time, A hint of a smile touched Chuck's face. Growth. The beginning of wisdom. When a fighter stops trying to prove something and starts trying to discover something, real martial arts begins. The camera caught a reaction shot of UFC's president seated nearby, looking contemplative. The commercial aspects of fighting, the trash talk, the manufactured rivalries, the social media feuds that drove pay-per-view sales suddenly seemed hollow in contrast to what they had all witnessed in the octagon. Mia pressed further, touching on what many were thinking. Some would say that what happened tonight challenges the direction combat sports have taken, prioritizing entertainment and personality over traditional martial values. Do you see it that way? Chuck considered this. His response measured. Every generation redeems these arts in their own image. That's natural, but beneath the evolving forms, certain principles remain constant. Discipline, respect, continuous improvement, humility before the art itself. Tonight wasn't about old school versus new school. It was about reconnecting with those principles. In the medical room, Dante absorbed these words with growing clarity. Everything that had defined his public persona, the brash confidence, the theatrical dominance, the carefully cultivated image of invincibility, suddenly seemed like armor he had constructed to protect a deeper insecurity. "I need to talk to him," Dante said, suddenly standing up. Coach Roy raised an eyebrow. "You sure that's wise? Perhaps give it some time. Process what transpired." But Dante was already peeling off the tape from his hands, resolute. "No, it must be now before I revert back to who I was." This openness, this naked honesty, was something Roy had never witnessed in his fighter. He nodded, recognizing the significance of the moment. "I'll try and get it done." All the while, the press conference was winding down. Chuck had replied to questions as always, briefly and profoundly, neither looking for the spotlight nor avoiding it. When he turned to exit, Mia posed one last question. "Chuck, you've had an extraordinary run with competition, then film, and now this moment that will be remembered tonight. What do you hope the people take away from what they've just seen? In that cage?" Chuck hesitated, choosing his words carefully. That genuine power doesn't yell. It indicates that mastery is not about controlling others, but about overcoming yourself, and that the greatest battle any of us will ever fight isn't in a cage or a ring or a tournament. It's the everyday battle to be better today than we were yesterday. With those words, he respectfully nodded to the gathered media and turned to exit, only to be confronted by Dante standing in the doorway, still wearing his fight shorts, t-shirt hastily donned. The room went silent. Cameras swiveled. The sudden standoff created instant tension. Would the low-key champion snap? Would anger flare up now that the limelight of the octagon no longer favored them? But Dante's stance bore none of his former haughtiness. He stood not in defiance, but in supplication, eyes unclouded with fresh humility. "Mr. Norris," he stated, his voice devoid of its customary cockiness. "May I speak with you in private?" Chuck looked at him for a moment, then nodded. Naturally, security cleared a small conference room near the press area. The door closed on the two fighters, one at the start of his journey, one at the end of his. Both bonded now by something more than competition. Off camera, operators stationed themselves outside the door, hoping to catch whatever transpired next. Mia hovered nearby, recognizing the importance of what was happening, but honoring the privacy of the moment. Inside the room, Dante wrestled with what to say. All of his rehearsed interview answers, all of his media training seemed insipid in the face of real emotion. "I want to apologize," he managed at last. "Not only for the disrespect, but for not understanding what all of this is truly about." Chuck looked at him with peaceful eyes, neither commanding nor rejecting the apology. "Why'd you begin fighting, Dante, in the first place?" The question took the young champion by surprise. He'd been questioned about his career 1,000 times before, but always in terms of success, never of what drove him. I had a tough childhood, he replied after a moment. East Los Angeles gangland turf. Brawling wasn't an option. Survival was. But I excelled at it. Very well. A gym owner in the neighborhood witnessed me defending myself in a street brawl and offered me a place to train rather than a place to blow myself up. Chuck nodded, hearing without interruption. It was all raw, Dante went on, shocking himself with his candor. Just me trying to be better, learning discipline, discovering something I could be proud of. The wins came after, the notice, the social media, the sponsors. He cut off the path clear. Success is a more treacherous foe than any you will encounter in the cage. Chuck watched in silence. It tests your character, not your technique. Dante nodded, a hard truth at last recognized. At some point, I began believing what I was saying, that undefeated equaled unbeatable, that popularity equaled mastery. And now Dante looked at Chuck directly, bravado giving way to honesty. Now I see that I have hardly started, that the belt, the record, the following, all of these things mean nothing in comparison to the road traveled. Chuck's face softened a bit, not a smile but approval. That knowledge is more valuable than any title. I want to learn, Dante had said. The words weighted with sincere commitment. Not techniques, not tactics, but what you exhibited in there tonight. That composure, that clearness. It does not develop overnight, Chuck warned. Not in days, not in weeks. It is the product of years, of decades. I'm prepared to do that work, Dante had answered. And for the first time that evening, there was no act in his voice, only honest resolve. Chuck weighed him for a moment, then pulled out a small card from his pocket and scribbled something on the back before offering it to Dante. My personal number, he said. When you're ready, really ready, call. Not for headlines, not for Facebook, but for the next step along the way. Dante took the card with the seriousness of being handed a holy book. Thank you. Chuck laid a hand on the young warrior's shoulder briefly, a gesture of bonding, of handing something indefinable yet needed from one generation to the next. Recall what went down in that cage tonight, Dante. Not the methods, not the result, but the time you realized you were fighting me and began fighting yourself. That is when it all flipped. And with those words, Chuck walked out of the room, leaving Dante to be alone with a start instead of a finish. Outside, cameras caught Chuck's exit from the arena, serene, deliberate, without spectacle. Social media still erupted in clips, quotes, memes, analysis, but Legend himself was unsoiled by the digital craze, as focused leaving as he had been arriving. In the currently vacant octagon, cleanup crews toiled with purpose, dismantling the stage, sweeping the canvas, dismantling the machinery of spectacle. But there was something remaining in that environment, something that could not be swept or dismantled. An instant of fact that had slipped beyond entertainment, a reminder that under the lights, past the roar, behind the pomp, was the beating, heart of martial arts. Not as business or show, but as a way to mastering the ultimate opponent every fighter ever has, themselves. 3 days following UFC Megacard, the web still buzzed with aftershocks. Chuck vs. Dante was still trending on all platforms. Highlight clips had racked up hundreds of millions of views. Analysis articles covered everything from the technicalities of the show to philosophical overtones in combat sports. In Los Angeles, Dante Cruz sat alone on the rooftop of his high-rise condominium, watching the sunrise color the city skyline amber and gold. His phone rested quietly alongside him, turned off deliberately since the night before. For the first time in his career, perhaps, he wasn't keeping an eye on his social media, watching mentions, or curating his online persona. The thick glass door to the rooftop swung open. Coach Roy stepped through, 2 hot cups of coffee in his hands. He walked over to where Dante was sitting and handed him one in silence. Thanks, said Dante, taking the cup. How did you get in? Your security man? Knew me, Roy said, pulling up a chair next to his fighter. Thought you might be up here. You always used to enjoy being in high places when you had major decisions to make. Dante raised an eyebrow. Who says I'm making one? Roy smiled quietly. Son, I've been training fighters for 30 years. I recognize the look of a man questioning his course. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, drinking coffee, seeing the city come to life beneath them. The Dante of a week previous would have filled the air with words, with ideas, with proclamations. This new Dante was satisfied with quiet contemplation. You've been avoiding interviews, Roy finally noted. UFC PR called me yesterday, said you weren't answering their calls either. Dante nodded. I needed to think, really think, not just react. And I don't know if I can become what I was again after that night. The trash talk, the persona, the whole charade. He waved vaguely at the city below. It's empty now. Roy thought about this, his weathered face contemplative. So don't become again, go forward. It's not that easy. The UFC, the sponsors, they signed on for the reign, not whatever I am now. They signed on for a champion, Roy retorted. How you wear that belt? That's your choice. Dante finally turned on his phone. Notifications filled the screen at once. Hundreds of messages, thousands of tags, endless commentary on the most viral second of his career. He ignored them all, opening instead his camera app. What are you doing? Roy questioned. Something I should have done ages ago, said Dante, being true. He took out the phone, positioning himself against the morning sky, and started recording. No filters, no practiced words, no acting. Hey everyone, Dante. No hype, no persona, just me speaking from the heart for once. He hesitated, collecting his thoughts. 3 days ago, I saw something in the octagon that transformed everything. Not only as a fighter, but as a person. Roy stood there quietly while his fighter spoke with authenticity he had hardly shown to the public eye. I've spent years building this reputation of being invincible, trash-talking, playing the role of the bad guy, seeking fame. But along the way, I forgot what martial arts is all about. Dante stopped, his face contemplative, not performative. The morning sun lit up the receding bruise on his cheekbone, a physical reminder of the lesson he learned. What Chuck Norris taught me wasn't about fighting skills. It was about character, about coming to this journey with humility, not arrogance, about realizing that strength is found in controlling yourself, not over others. He breathed deeply, his words next following with evident determination. I'm stepping back, not retiring, not relinquishing the belt. I'll fight it out for whoever the UFC brings before me, but I'm retiring social media for a time. Away from the trash talk, away from the entire reign persona. Rather, I'm going back to the basics, back to being a martial arts student, not merely an MMA practitioner. I've been afforded the chance to learn from one of the best martial artists ever, and I'm going to pay that respect by doing the work, the actual work, not merely what is pretty on TV. He stopped recording, then turned to Roy. What do you think? The old coach watched him for a lengthy moment. I believe that's the first time since you claimed the belt that you've ever spoken as the young man I met in that gym 10 years earlier. The one who competed because he enjoyed the art, not because of the accolades. Without hesitation, Dante uploaded the video. No changes, no meetings with management or UFC PR, just plain candor conveyed straight to millions of followers. Back at his ranch near Dallas, meanwhile, Chuck Norris went through his daily routine with the same controlled serenity that had characterized his appearance days before. Still training every day at 85, not with the intensity of his competitive years, but with the regularity of a man for whom martial arts was not a profession, but a lifestyle. In his private dojo, a converted barn with polished hardwood floors and unadorned decor, he went through a series of forms, movement perfected by thousands of repetitions over decades, No one watched, no one filmed. The performance was for itself, a ritual of discipline and concentration. When he was done, he picked up his phone from a little table. Dozens of notifications, interview requests, happy messages, video URLs. One notification in particular, a text message from a number he didn't know. Mr. Norris, it's Dante Cruz. I've been thinking constantly about what we talked about everything. I don't desire a quick solution or a press release. I desire to know what you demonstrated. When you told me to call when I was ready, I am ready. Not for a shortcut, but for the hard work, whatever it takes. Chuck read it twice, then placed the phone aside without responding right away. Not out of lack of interest, but out of respect for the importance of the moment. Some answers need not be so hastily given. Some vows need not be so lightly taken. He had gone to the window, gazing out across the landscape of Texas. Dawn breaking on dew-kissed grass, oak trees standing as silent sentinels. Watching this serene scene from this tranquil spot, the extravagance of Las Vegas seemed far away. And still, the bond created in that cage was sharp, present. His fingers hesitated on the keyboard of the phone, each word carefully selected. Dante, I value your message and its sentiment. Real change is not the product of one flash of wisdom, but of the infinitude of small choices that follow. The way of the martial arts is not different from the way of life. They're the same path calling for the same devotion to development. If you're serious about this work, it starts with being consistent about little things. Discipline in private, humility when praised, strength with compassion. I'm going to California next month to train with some past students. If you wish to come along, it will not be for cameras or publicity, but for quiet, serious practice among devoted practitioners. Consider it and write to me. Either way, I admire the bravery it requires to challenge your own journey. That's where all significant development starts. 3 months on, one crisp autumn morning, a small group of us were congregated in a private dojo just outside Los Angeles. No cameras there, no social media coverage, no promotional thought. Chuck Norris worked through a sequence of fundamental forms, his movements still flowing and accurate despite age. Surrounding him, 8 students trailed in unison, some obviously veteran practitioners, others more recent converts to the craft. Among them stood Dante Cruz, belt removed of rank, clad in the same plain white G as everyone else. No championship belt lined the wall. No UFC posters touted his achievements. Here he was, neither champion nor star. Merely another student on the journey starting anew with humility and purpose. Chuck completed the form and turned to face the class. Remember, he said, his voice carrying the same calm authority it had that night in the octagon. Martial arts is not about adding things. It's about stripping away what's unnecessary in your technique, in your thinking, in your character. The goal isn't complexity, it's essence. After class, as the others, departed, Chuck and Dante remained behind. They sat side by side along the edge of the training mat, morning sunbeams etching patterns of light and shadow on the polished floor. Your title defense is next week, Chuck noted. Are you ready? Dante nodded. Technically, physically, yes. The rest, he shrugged faintly. I'm still trying to find my way. Fighting without the persona, fighting without the anger behind it. It's different. Different doesn't mean weaker, Chuck answered. Struggling from a place of centeredness, not ego, opens you up to something more. Trust it. I just want to get this right to demonstrate that what I took away from you wasn't a fleeting thing, a marketing hook, that it's altering my approach to everything. Chuck regarded him with unobstructed eyes. Don't think about representing anything. Don't struggle to win an argument with others or even yourself. Just be completely present in every moment. The rest will take care of itself. A week after, T-Mobile. Arena was packed to the rafters for Dante's title defense against a hungry contender with an unblemished record and a reputation for ruthless knockouts. In the still quietness of his locker room backstage, Dante warmed up with abnormally still concentration. The blaring music was gone, the entourage, the pre-fight pomp. Instead, he sat in meditation, eyes closed, breath steady, center established. As he walked to the arena, a familiar face stood outside the tunnel entrance. Chuck Norris, standing silently among the busy UFC production team. Dante stopped short, surprised. "I had no idea you were coming." Chuck nodded ever so slightly. Some trips warrant witnesses. When Dante emerged into the arena, the reaction was deafening. Not with the divisive response his past performances had been met with, but with collective respect. The narrative of his metamorphosis had spoken to more than just hardcore fight enthusiasts, at something universal in growth, humility, and the strength to do an about-face. He stepped toward the octagon untheatrically. No camera play, no posturing with intimidation, no choreographed entrance, just a determined warrior moving toward his art with purpose and respect. When the bell sounded, he struggled with all his might, his technical mastery unabated, his physical equipment as razor-sharp as ever. But something basic had changed in his game. Where he had once struggled to overwhelm, to destroy, to establish his superiority, he now struggled merely to manifest the ultimate expression of his art. In the third round, he won by submission. Technically precise, respectfully done, released forthwith when the tap came. There was no gloating celebration afterwards, no jumping on the cage or showing of dominance. Just a pause of quiet recognition and then a respectful hug of his vanquished foe. During the post-fight interview, Dante stepped up to the microphone, breathing already regulated despite the rigors of championship fighting level. Firstly, respect to my opponent. He is a fighter, and it was a privilege to share the octagon with him. The audience reacted with respectful applause, not for performative respect that was commonplace in post-fight interviews, but for real acknowledgement that arose from martial understanding. As for changes, Dante went on, I've been lucky to have learned from someone who is what martial arts can be at its best. Chuck Norris taught me that night that real strength isn't about beating people down. It's about controlling yourself. I'm only at the start of that journey, still learning every day what it means to be not only a fighter, but a martial artist. He looked over the side of the arena where Chuck sat, watching in silence without seeking attention for himself. The belt, the record, the accolades, all of that means less than the journey itself, fighting with integrity, learning with discipline, showing respect for the art and everyone who seeks it. Dante's face showed no remnant of his previous arrogance, only sincere conviction. That's what I'm dedicated to now. Not because it makes me a better champion, although I think it does, but because it makes me a better human being. Later that evening, after press conferences and medical examinations, Dante's phone vibrated with a text message. Chuck Norris, well done. Not the win, though. That was impressive. But the way you behaved, the journey goes on tomorrow. 6 a.m. Dante smiled, putting the phone away. 6 months earlier, his reaction would have been resentment at the early morning hour, resistance to continued discipline. Now he felt only gratitude for the lesson that had begun in anger and continued in mentorship for the path that had unfolded before him, for the realization that real mastery was not a destination, but an ongoing process. As night fell around him, one thing remained truer than ever. The most significant victories are not won in cages or rings under spotlights or before cameras. They're won in secret moments of decision, in daily disciplines hidden from any audience, in the constant polishing of character that is the hallmark, not only of great fighters but of great human beings. A reminder to all who saw it that true strength need not announce itself with bombast or brutality. True strength simply and profoundly shows. Up next, we have 2 more unbelievable stories waiting for you. Just click the image you'd like to watch and it will take you there. If you liked this video, please be sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.